Viva Puerto Rico! Otra vez. Viva Puerto Rico! I'm happy to see you. We are here to present the state of the organization. We're here to honor our board of directors, and then we're here to feature our keynote speakers. Now, when we do the state of the organization, we're reflecting upon our work, but really, the quality of the work is reflected in how you perceive the work and how you change. The work comes down to impact. It comes down to the impact that it has on you, and it comes down to the impact that you have on your communities. And so, I am personally really honored to be able to feature the voices of GIA's membership associate, Mar Undag, and GIA's membership manager, Zoe Williams.
Thank you, Eddie. Hi, everyone. I know this is the moment we've all been waiting for. Trust me, I'll keep it short and sweet. Don't worry. So yes, as Eddie mentioned, we're going to talk about what membership is really looking like this year, and then we're also just going to take a look at what we want in the future. Every year we send out a member survey, and the reflection that we get is really indicative of how we want our programming to look in the next year, how we want our communications to look in the next year, and it allows us some time to reevaluate our member benefits. You can go right ahead. I'm gonna have Mars start off with some of the highlights. Go ahead.
Thanks, Zoe. So some highlights from last year's survey was that 86% of members were either satisfied or very satisfied with their membership. And why do our members value GIA? 56% of members stated that GIA provides a valuable forum for exploring critical issues facing the field. 57% of members said that GIA provides important research and information. 38% said that GIA provides programs and services that have helped their organization fulfill its mission. 29% said that GIA influenced change in organization, the foundation, or agency. Lastly, 21% of members said that GIA has influenced the president, board of directors, and commission members. I'm going to pass it back to Zoe, who is going to give us a little deep dive on the changes that our members are doing in the field.
So yes, as we can see, the numbers here tell us that 57% of members have increased giving in 2022. 44 have increased support to individual artists. 41 have increased multi-year giving, and my favorite, 80% have increased support to BIPOC artists and cultural workers. We also have an increased support for trans artists, 53%. 73% have increased support to BIPOC-led organizations. And 40% have increased support to artists with disabilities and disability-led organizations. When we ask our members what most influenced these changes, we have our racial equity workshops. We know every year those are super popular. They sell out right away. Obviously, our webinars, informal conversations with other GIA members, and just informal gatherings, as well as our annual conference. We also like to ask our members what topics they value the most, because that, again, is going to inform our programming for the upcoming year. Obviously, again, 94% racial equity, so popular. 77% is support for individual artists. 72% want creative placemaking. And 53% want arts, environment, and climate change, which is something that we already were working on, and we realized that, and we put it into our programming here at this conference. So I'm really proud of that. Looking towards the future, topics to explore further: Indigenous arts, very, very, popular, and something that we really wanted to, focus on during this conference, being that we are an Indigenous space. Support for individual artists, policy and advocacy, community arts, rural arts, arts and disability, arts and the environment, and emergency readiness. So as I said, member survey goes out once a year. Many of you will be getting it in the next couple weeks. Please, please, please participate. Your participation is what informs our work. And for those of you that are not members, I hope that seeing all of this and hearing all of this information, you'll consider joining us. Thank you.
Now, at this conference and in general, I get a lot of people coming up to me and congratulating me, thanking me. Great job on the conference, great job on the webinar, great job on the workshop, etc. Keep that up, I love that. But the fact of the matter is that every positive experience you have had with Grant Makers in the Arts is thanks to the Grant Makers in the Arts team members. Grant Makers in the Arts currently has about 330 members, more members than since the pandemic began. We've had more lapsed and former members renew than since before the pandemic began. Our active members' renewal rate is nearly 100%, one of the highest renewal rates we have ever had. So I want to say thank you to Membership Associate Mar Undag and Membership Manager Zoe Williams. You yourselves have said that the impact, the influence on your work has come down to the workshops, the webinars, the podcasts, this conference. I want to say a great big thank you to Senior Program Manager Sherilyn Seeley and Vice President and Director of Programs, Nadia Lokta. You wouldn't know about any of this work if not for our communications. GIA has experienced a 72% increase in online engagement across our platforms. We've reached, as of the middle of this year, 26,000 followers across our social media platforms. In 2023 alone, the GIA website has had upwards of 200,000 visitors. Since its launch last summer, the digital GIA Reader has received over 13,000 unique visitors and 21,000 page views. We want to say thank you to Communications Manager Jamie Sharp. And one of the major themes of all of these discussions of making sure our organizations are healthy is that you cannot be programmatically bold if you're economically, financially vulnerable. We wouldn't be able to do any of this work if we weren't in healthy financial shape. Not the webinars, not the workshops, not the podcasts, not the readers. We would not be standing here at this conference if not for our financial management. I want to say thank you to Finance and Operations Director Champ Connect. Throughout all of our time together, here at this conference and every time you interact with us, whether it's online or in person, please remember, none of this would happen if not for the GIA team members. They are the brains and the muscle of this organization. On behalf of the entire Grant Makers in the Arts community team, I see you, I honor you, and I thank you. When I was hired by GIA, I sat in on a board meeting led by my predecessor, Janet Brown. At this board meeting, the board voted in a new officer. They voted in Sharnita Johnson, who was a new board member, as secretary of the board. After the board meeting, I was invited by a couple of the board officers to join them for a casual dinner. It was me and the vice chair and the secretary at the time, and it was Sharnita. I sat down with them, and we just talked. And by the end of that dinner, I thought, wow, I really can't wait for this person to become our board chair. And now we're there. Sharnita, you have been the most conscientious, most values-driven, hardest-working board chair GIA has ever had. You are my family, and I love you. Let's say thank you to Grantmakers in the Arts Board Chair, the Vice President of Strategy, Impact, and Communications for the Victoria Foundation, Sharnita Johnson.
Thank you, Eddie. I want to be the chair forever. As outgoing chair, I'm going to take a minute of privilege and go off script and just say a huge thank you to the GIA board and the members for giving me this incredible privilege and opportunity to serve in this role. This has been some of the most important, joyful, and rewarding work that I have ever done, and I do not take it for granted. I have so much admiration and love for all of my board members, all of the team. You've made this a beautiful, beautiful journey, and I'm looking forward to staying connected. And I wanted to make sure that I thanked everyone, including the incredible GIA team and all of the folks that have made this conference as amazing and wonderful as it is, the hands and the hearts seen and unseen. Because when I say that this conference is lit, I mean it is lit. It's been amazing. Yes, absolutely. So I am here to present the board report. And I'd like to thank our board officers, our vice chair, Eleanor Savage from the Jerome Foundation, our treasurer, Long Chu of the Houston Endowment, our secretary, Keita Sullivan of the New England Foundation for the Arts. I'd also like to thank our executive committee at large, Roberta Bedoya, City of Oakland, Emiko Ono, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. And I'd like to welcome our newest board members joining us for their first 3-year term starting in January 2024, Susan Anderson, board member, Alaska Pacific University, formerly president of the Siri Foundation in Anchorage, Alaska. Jennifer Coleman, program director of Creative Culture and Art, the George Gunn Foundation in Cleveland, Ohio. Anna Needham, tribal relations manager, Arizona Commission on the Arts, Tucson, Arizona. Michelle Ramos, board member, Foundation for Louisiana, formerly executive director of Alternate Roots, New Orleans, Louisiana. GIA has a rigorous process of selecting new board members from among the dozens of quality nominations we receive every year. Candidates were selected from dozens of nominations submitted by the membership and recommended by the nominating committee. Serving on the nominating committee were co-chairs Michelle Coffey, Lambent Foundation, and Adriana Gallego, Arts Foundation for Tucson and Southern Arizona, along with Kristen Sakota, Los Angeles County Department of Arts, Culture, and Eleanor Savage, the Jerome Foundation. Their recommendations were reviewed and approved by the GIA Board of Directors to be placed in nomination and voted on by the GIA membership. GIA strives for a governing board that reflects the diversity of the field it serves. Consideration was given to funder type, funder size, funder focus, geography, personal experience, leadership, gender, ethnicity, and age, among other criteria. We are sorry to say goodbye to our colleagues who are finishing their 6th year on the board. Roberto Bedoya, City of Oakland, Randy Langstrom in Seattle, Washington, and me, Sharnita Johnson, Victoria Foundation in Newark, New Jersey. For everyone currently, so let's give them a round of applause. Roberto and Randy, please rise. I cannot see you, so please rise. Yes! And for everyone currently on the board and our board members-elect, please rise for a round of applause. And if there are any alums in the audience, please rise for a round of applause. Thank you all so much. I am on a selfie tour. I'm taking selfies with everybody in here, so if we haven't had our selfie yet, I am enjoying and basking in the glow of my last few months as board chair, so let's get a selfie.
Hi. Wow, it's really hard to see everybody with these lights. I have the great honor of introducing our keynote speaker today, and I'm so thrilled to be doing that. Thank you.
What organization? Say your whole name here.
Oh, I was about to do that. Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rocío Aranda Alvarado. Soy hija de Elsie Mary Verónica Alvarado y Sergio Patricio Aranda, nieta de Fernando Aranda, Wenceslao Alvarado, Luisa Godú, y Elsie Philip de Alvarado. I bring my family with me to this room, and I embrace us all as relatives. Thank you for being here. I know there is already a really good bio on our next keynote speaker in the book, so I want to approach this introduction from a more personal perspective. Ramon's fantastic book, Performing Queer Latinidad, and his other writings, including the most recent essay that I read that he published in the Whitney Museum of American Art's catalog that accompanied the exhibition No Existe un Mundo Post-Huracán, which was about the experience in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. From these writings, I learned from Ramón how a dance, a movement, a body in motion can be a quiet and powerful gesture in the intimate setting of a small theater in the Bronx. A young queer man can feel that his story is being told. I asked Ramon's permission to read this part. My two companions, both Latino gay men, and I found ourselves in tears throughout the whole performance. We could not speak to each other at the time. We silently made our way to the subway station en route to our neighborhood in Brooklyn. I was touched by the performance. Despite the absence of an explicit critique of Giuliani, perhaps more so because of it, I was forced to encounter my own anger. I had to surrender to the sheer beauty of the flowing fabric and the simplicity of Aviles' movement, Arthur Aviles. As I think about this event years later, I can still recall vividly the moment in the performance when I felt I had to give in and release my tension in a profoundly felt cry. Ramón also taught me how, in the public space, the space of protest, A dance can be a feminist expression, a revolutionary movement, the downfall of a corrupt and disdainful politician, an ugly symbol of a colonized territory. There are many people who have helped to bring attention to the work of artists from Puerto Rico on the mainland. Among these is our illustrious speaker, Ramón Rivera-Servera. Ramón has leveraged his power at large institutions to create real investment in artists in Puerto Rico. With his Puerto Rican Arts Initiative, he has raised a lot of money to support the work of artists, and importantly, to bring them to the attention of institutions outside of the island, providing more opportunities for artists who want to continue to work here in their home. Ramón continues to work to foment collaborative partnerships among artists and institutions. This was built into the work he's done. Please help me to thank and welcome Ramón Rivera-Servera.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank Eddie Torres and the team here at Grantmakers in the Arts for the invitation to address you here in my hometown of San Juan, and the honor of being in conversation with one of my most admired colleagues, mi colega in Latinx arts field, Rocio Aranda. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate the multiplicity of voices the conference organizers have put together, as well as the emphases on these shorter provocations with time to really dialogue with the audience. So in honoring that format, I'm going to move fairly quickly with 3 walks and 3 historical lessons to get us into dialogue about Puerto Rican Latinx arts. My presentation will be anchored by 3 walks and 3 historical lessons as I share with you some thoughts, provocations about what you might be able to do to advance the work of Puerto Rican and Latinx arts. Although I have to say, the last time I was at Grantmakers in the Arts was the Chicago conference a long time ago. And from seeing you all here in the past couple of days, the conversations I've had, and seeing those statistics on what you're reporting in terms of your areas of investment, it's a very different organization. I'm very grateful for that. So at the core of my argument is my conviction that artists are the most efficient builders of worlds I know, from imagining them to bringing them into fruition through intentional creative action, and are thus one of the most necessary agents in creating a more just future. I will anchor much of my thoughts on the work of the Puerto Rican Arts Initiative, which we affectionately call La PRAI. And La PRAI is a developmental curatorial platform launched in 2017 first to support Puerto Rican artists whose work animates critical interventions into our engagement with the environment, rights to the city, and community infrastructures, both affective and material. It is a feminist, trans, Black affirmative platform that recognizes the work of the artist as essential to our survival in Puerto Rico and its diaspora. Initiated as a short-term residency program at Northwestern University and originally focused on the question of debt in Puerto Rico. And we have 3 of those initial residents in the room today, Arnaldo Rodriguez Bagué, Pepe Alvarez Colon, both of whom ultimately became doctoral students at Northwestern back then and who are finishing those dissertations now, and Mulawayi and Mapensi, Las Nietas de Nono, who came for 1-week residencies to think about debt and develop an action practice at the end of the process, really thinking about the artist as a researcher and as public intervention agent. And then the project pivoted immediately after the passing of Hurricanes Irma and Maria and the subsequent calamities that have occupied our time working in this space in the past 6 years. Earthquakes, pandemics, political uprisings. We danced the revolution with masks. And what I'll tell you is the work that we're doing, you're going to see slides that are going to keep moving, and this is the work from the second iteration of PRAI commissions that just closed a month ago, and we launched books documenting all of the process of the artist. So you'll see that what I've done today is emerging from the conversations I've had with some of you, our encounters at the museums and the gallery spaces where we've gone, to reflect with you about some of the questions I have around funding Latinx arts, but also to put in context some of the experiences you've already had. So I come to you today as an academic of the arts with a developmental curatorial practice and a history of developing those platforms in order to do my work, and a scholarly trajectory as an ethnographer of arts communities. So I have spent the past 32 years in the United States, from a student to a professor to a dean, twice the time I've lived in the archipelago, researching how communities are constituted and mobilized through the arts, and in turn, the impact creative practices have on communities, their constitution, health, and material viability. My early work focused on queer Latinx community building and activism through dance and movement across the United States in the 1990s and early aughts, and that's where Rocio pulled that quote on Arthur's magnificent piece of protest against Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of the city. My work has evolved into a more expansive consideration of performance and visual art practices emergent from feminist and queer Latinx and Afro-diasporic communities across North America and the Caribbean, especially as they address the extended histories of colonialism and its legacies in our environment, social, economic, and political life, as well as our institutions and our publics. This is not an artist as social worker model, though we prioritize artists with deep community connections. It requires trust in the work of the artist, into the social sphere, and an understanding of the range of creative communities we host, from indie music and Vogue to experimental performance and media. It also mines the circulation, documentation, and criticism about how this body of work, about this body of work beyond its immediate community as yet another critical contribution. My own scholarship and curatorial practice called me very early into academic administration. And I'm glad that this organization has changed so that this doesn't have to happen as frequently. It was not by choice then, it was by necessity, I may add. As then a young scholar and emerging advocate for the arts, the historical neglect of our arts communities in the academy meant that to do the work I meant to do, I needed to create platforms and pathways that were lacking institutionalized grounding in the academy or at majoritarian institutions. For us, focus as arts institutions had been on becoming a critical space for making and thinking, the goals of our reparative inclusiveness continued to stall nationally, especially around the work of Puerto Rican and Latinx arts. I have jumped into this supposed ugly side, although it's not ugly, it's actually rather beautiful, and I appreciate the work of being able to make this possible. And I have enjoyed an unusual career between the work of the arts and the labor of administration. So today I talk to you as someone who has traversed the arts from the community to the academy and back, and whose work found its way into the broader national scene as part of a trend that I find both hopeful and challenging. These trends have serious implications for Puerto Rican and Latinx arts in particular, and many of these you probably have identified already, and I saw that survey result, and I'm feeling a lot more hopeful than the kind of advice I thought I was going to give you initially. So much of what inspires me about the road ahead, including the advancement of my own projects in support of the arts, have been made possible by the bold conceptual framework and support coming from this particular community. Mellon Foundation has been critical to making a lot of this work happen. Sarah Nash, who went immediately into making phone calls to Maureen at Doris Duke, she moved all over the place and understanding the urgency of the project and trying to network a young academic and trying to figure out how to become a platform for developing new work. And part of those partnerships with the university as a critical platform continue to really become urgent transactions and opportunities for us to pursue at a time when the growth in curatorial and presenting programs for Latinx and Puerto Rican arts is not finding a match on the developmental side of the equation. So I think real emphasis on developmental pipelines that can ascend to the programming needs and aspirations of a lot of institutions is really critical. So we have all this recognition of the historical disadvantages indigenous, Black, Latinx, queer, working class, and so many other communities have endured in the history of most institutionalized art institutions in the United States. And I say this as someone who benefited from the kinds of interventions and institutional critiques insisting on transforming the university and the museum since the civil rights movements into 1980s multicultural critique, into 1990s alternative frameworks, and the rise into prominence of the critical scholarship and community practices that developed from that space, as well as the institutional work of diversity policies to recruit and retain people like me, artists of our kind, which have been significantly challenged of late, especially in the university space. Nonetheless, especially in the past decade, we have seen the expansion of lots of initiatives around Latinx and Puerto Rican arts. But nonetheless, the truth remains that Latinx communities, who constitute almost 20% of the population in the United States, receives a much lower percentage of the total philanthropic support in the country, and especially Afro-Latinx, queer, feminist work that is coming from experimental practices has not yet found a fair source of support in comparative frameworks. So despite efforts to address this lack of balance in the arts fields, the reality is that investments in Latinx arts has been disproportionately and unfairly low. And of course, you expect me to say this at a conference of grant makers in the arts while we meet in Puerto Rico and as you experience the display of so much of the richness and power of our artistic communities and institutions during your visit. And while this is indeed one of my primary goals, to entice you into thinking rigorously about how to engage the United States' largest ethno-racial community in toto, Puerto Ricans in particular as well, I also want to nuance our discussion into particulars. So I am an ethnographer who writes cultural history. And for those who have not read my work before, you probably recognize, if you have read my work before, you'll recognize the history with which I recur to history lessons and the embodied practice of walking as both an orientation to the cultural scene I go to analyze, but also an aesthetic and sensorial methodology for understanding how the work of the arts manifests and moves us. Today, I'm going to offer 3 brief walks and 3 history lessons to help us launch into the conversation with Rocio and to show my full deck of cards, invite you to invest in Puerto Rico and Latinx arts, to do so with attention to developmental pipelines of the work and networks of practice, and to do so with intention to support impactful work relevance to communities. All of these, a bit of a lingua franca in our funding circles, but still in need of materialization across many Latinx and Rican communities. History lesson number 1, on the poetics of historical absence. This lesson of a walking practice of sorts, as Sofia Gallizá-Muriente is the artist I'm about to cite, traverses natural landscapes and archival repertoires of Puerto Rico in search of our history, our story, and seeks to mark and supplement its voice with creative interventions. In Observatorio de Lagunas, she uses the image of the lagoon, and as she states, Observatorio de Lagunas investiga, politiza y poetiza la labor de recordar en Puerto Rico. The Lagoon Observatory investigates, politicizes, and poetizes the labor of remembering in Puerto Rico. And that combination of remembering in a political, poetic form, the conjoinment of the aesthetic with politics really shapes up a lot of our notions of history in the experimental, but also the community-based work. So I'm gonna tell you this walk. The first one, that was my historical lesson. This is my first walk. And this is at the Mexicarte Museum in Austin, Texas. And I have just arrived at my first public event in the city of Austin, as I assume my new position as Dean of the College of Fine Arts at my doctoral alma mater, the University of Texas at Austin. This is 2.5 years ago. As I entered the Mexicarte Museum on Congress Avenue to offer formal remarks at the opening of the Chicano Art Movimiento y Más in Austin, Texas, 1960s to 1980s, I encountered the didactic panel with this statement. Some of these Austin's artists arrive at concientización that took place while learning the history of oppression people face, gaining pride in their connections to indigenous and mestizo roots, or finding unity in the concept of Aztlán, the ancestral Aztec homeland. This awakening led to a reevaluation of their artwork. During this time, the University of Texas art faculty focused on the popular art trend of universal art, artwork that appealed to all people. These teachers made it clear that art should not be used as a political tool, but instead a more personal expression. For some of these young Chicano and Chicana artists, standing outside the fray with their artwork was not an option. Many of these artists created work for local Chicano newspapers and political causes, while also creating, Sorry, I lost my, I'm gonna get there in a second, sorry. My apologies. There we go. Many of these artists related work to local Chicano newspapers and political causes while also creating more traditional art projects to fulfill their assignments as students. In this space, we see how the university's exclusions created an alternative economy of art making and institution building. My concern now is as we start intervening majoritarian organizations with an influx of acquisitions, programmings, exhibitions, and practices that honor their historical exclusions, that we not lose sight of this political lacuna, to go back to Sofia Gallizá-Muriente, where she's thinking about the lagoon as a precarious environmental form, but the lacuna as the practice of memory that we often forget that give birth and form to the aesthetics that advance in particular communities. And that relationship requires that we build in collaboration to community and that we think rigorously about that space in the future. And that brings me to my second walk, and that happened with some of you earlier this week when we visited Puerto Rico Negro at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Puerto Rico. And then, and it happened on Sunday as we all venture into the guided exhibition tour of Puerto Rico Negro at the Museum de Arte Contemporáneo. Walking for the first time into this historic exhibition, which occupies all halls in the museum, and I have to say, thank goodness that it took that much space, that it gives space to the work, that it brought so much practice into view, offered an opportunity to both celebrate and amplify the cultural and important contributions of Black Puerto Ricans to contemporary art on the archipelago and the diaspora. It is also an explicit display of the voids of our exhibition history. As Marina Reyes Franco explained, the limited institutional investments in exhibiting Black as Black art as Black art on the islands. Those efforts of previously organized group exhibitions landing on the agency of efforts of artists themselves, which brings me to lesson number 2, and another lagoon. History lesson number 2, on the history of artistic agency. Responding to an interview for a feature article in the exhibition at El Nuevo Día, Puerto Rico's daily of record, Maricel Ortiz, the curator of the exhibition, pronounced, "Our point of departure was a moment in which we could only historicize maybe about 4 exhibitions explicitly dedicated to Black Puerto Rican artists. So we started with many historical lagoons, from the invisibilization, from an emphasis on Puerto Ricanness that tends to homogenize that we're all Puerto Ricans, and with an intention not to just emphasize differences, but to celebrate them," end quote. Here, the work of the curator is not just to rescue Black art from Puerto Rican history, but to begin from the exercise of marking the history of Black exclusion from the institutional history of art, and to recognize the preceding efforts to think, form a community of art making, Black art making, into action, and then articulating its rich archive of practitioners. Reparative inclusionary work is not just additive in nature, bringing the excluded objects or people into the authorized space, but about addressing the coordinates and contexts in the history of exclusion and intervening them as historically aware practice. This brings me to lesson number 3. You see, so we're counting, we're on 3s. Even our survivance of the impossible has a history. In Habitar lo Imposible, the recently published book edited by performance artist Nidia Pastrana Santiago and dance scholar Susan Omar to document the history of experimental dance in Puerto Rico, the authors open with the following statement: It is from and through the body that one can inhabit the world. Hence, how to perceive it otherwise. The body is not only a biological entity, but a social construct that carries its history, its experiences, struggles, and potency. I see deep correlation between the experimental dance practices cultivated at a place like the University of Puerto Rico, where a significant part of this experimental scene launched, and the modalities of activism, the archipelago's most successful and widespread collective uprisings. The practices of locomotion of the soberano, which is the part of the reflection I advanced for the Whitney Museum, has to do with the 2019 practices in Old San Juan protesting the corrupt governor. And while I focus on Nivia Pastrana Santiago's interventions in that essay, there were tons of choreographed practices that advanced during the period of the protest. Caravans in horses, kayaks, motorcycles, ATVs, all spectacular choreographies of protest. And to me, they echoed the tactical mappings of movements that Nivia herself had mobilized in her own body across the perimeter of the San Juan Bay and San Juan's Spanish colonial infrastructure, to this day the seat of government and the epicenter of tourist Instagrammable iconicity. Dance experimentalism has been key to how these new forms of activism, feminist, queer, Black, have unraveled in Puerto Rico. They do so not as separate, but alongside and integral to something like Perreo Combativo. They also do so with an awareness of its dance forbearers in equally agentive renditions of and engagements with bomba, salsa, hip-hop, and so many other social dance revolutions born out of Puerto Rican choreographic ingenuity or brilliantly adopted and adapted into our repertoires. This trajectory of moving otherwise in a Puerto Rican context has its roots in our own circulation as laborers in the dance experiments in large metropolitan areas of the United States, especially New York City since the 1970s, as moving bodies that animated the social dance choreographies like salsa and ultimately train and perform and continue to train and perform in the US American, but also European and Latin American dance avant-gardes. Unfortunately, we're never quite recorded as agents or makers, often ignored or dismissed as borrowers of repertoires. And we are prolific at adaptation, at using others' commons to build our own in the form of practices, theories in practice, born out of our coloniality, but the series of exploring our sovereignties, erotic and otherwise, through movement. We perform that hybrid habituation with intentional difference. In Puerto Rico, for example, the precarious public university, where faculty such as dancer, choreographer Viveca Vasquez at the program in Gender and Women's Studies and Drama, and Petra Bravo in the drama department, had been teaching experimental dance practice and theory as foundational to the curriculum. And in those spaces, dance insisted in creating knowledge from the vantage point and intelligence of our bodies. In that very university, Noemí Segarra had built a makeshift outdoor dance floor, Piso Phoenix, atop the remaining cement base of a ruined structure to congregate and house collective feminist and queer embodiments. Nivia Pastrana Santiago's embodied mapping exercises over the past decade exemplify the development of this approach. In Los Presidentes Pisan o Conmemorando lo Invisible, o Quiero Ser un Iconoclasta Sexy, she staged a performative intervention among the iconic Paseo de los Presidentes statuary behind the Capitol building, posing sensually with the bronze sculptures commemorating visits of the US president to the archipelago, and at times grinding on them in a move reminiscent of Perreo. Pastrana Santiago also undertook mapping exercises throughout the San Juan Bay region since 2015, exploring the perimeter of the city's maritime hub at sites both industrial and touristic. Lying against the surfaces of colonial infrastructure, submerging into or floating on the bay's waters, and mimicking the movement patterns of both human and non-human agents through dance produce intimate anticipatory knowledge of the terrain later activated by the activism of 2019. With kayaks and other boats approaching the city via the water, and horses, motorcycles, automobiles, and bicycles accompanying those on foot in forceful but joyful processions, protesters activated locomotive strategies as creative gestures for encountering and countering the hardness of a colonial infrastructure. Materiality involves the depths of history while setting the conditions of a temporal leap into a world imagined or made through creative activation. At the Puerto Rican Arts Initiative, we worked in deep collaboration with artists, trusting that the best way to advance impact is to follow the lead of the artists, the communities of support they have cultivated in advancing their mission. We decided this was the networks of practice we wanted to support rather than centralizing a mechanized production machine. The Puerto Rican Arts Initiative was designed to provide support. That was not me. This professionalization, the idea was to develop a professionalization, development residency, and curatorial commissioning program that we work with a group of 17 artists in ephemeral art genres with commitment to engaging communities. A central goal of this project was to stabilize and incentivize arts practitioners whose work impacts the larger public, especially communities and underserved art markets. And if you recall, this is the moment of the post-hurricane rescue. What most universities, I was a faculty member at a university, were bringing artists, were extracting artists from the chaos of the situation into places of safety. It was a rescue mission. But it dawned on me that the biggest tragedy and to compound the situation on the islands was to really extract the people who could envision together with communities how we could build critique, but also possibility into this moment. So the urgency of our program was to make sure that we could endow the possibility of artists remaining on the island, even at the most difficult times. And boy, have we had difficult times with the earthquake swarms, pandemic, everything else. But we have advanced a significant amount of work during this period. And we funded for impact around 3 curatorial engines at the time: community infrastructures, right to the city, and ecological imaginaries. And in these spaces, we invested in the possibilities of art to redress history, to imagine a more just future for the practice and its sourcing, and in developing strong networks of support. I want to encourage you to walk on your own through our history and contemporary arts practices. But the third walk is not yours to complete, although I want you to execute one. The third walk I want to articulate appeared yesterday as I walked into my collaborator's house in the middle of a major aguacero, which I'm sure you all survived as well. And as we were talking in general about walks and history, they mentioned a beautiful article published this past August in the Claridad periodical by Rebio Diaz, who's a psychologist, singer-songwriter, and a professor in New York. And in this little piece that he writes to his kid who's about to enter university in the United States, not the University of Puerto Rico, he reminisces of that hallway in the humanities hall, the humanities area of the university, the kinds of sociabilities about knowledge and criticality that emerge in those spaces, the overflow of the Pasillo to the Rio Piedras community, the ways in which art was seated all over the place as a result of an inhabited, thriving university, and waxed nostalgic and lamented the disinvestment in the university, the emptiness of the halls as students have dispersed into other campuses or gone internationally, but also thought about the possibilities, yearned for a moment when those university hallways will pour into the city again, animate new ways of doing and thinking, about the arts, humanities, about our future. And that's the last walk I wanted to remember, because it's a walk that can think rigorously about the inadequacies of history and even the present, understanding that right now the university as an engine of possibility for the arts is significantly stressed by this investment of our government. And to see the ways in which we can think about partnerships between the arts organizations that surround the university, now at a time when the university cannot be the source, the sole source of funding and possibility for the work around. So it's really interesting in thinking with Pepe Alvarez Colón and Arnaldo Rodriguez Bagué just last night, as they are here finishing a PhD program, doing all the work that they did before as agents and artists in the community, and thinking about how can they, from the position of the artist, the critical artist and curator, help advance practice and life back into the university halls, right? So it's kind of a flip of a moment in history where the bedrock of experimentalism for political dance and practice, artistic practice in Puerto Rico was seeded and funded by the university, to a moment when the arts are coming back into the university as a form of rescue for sustaining that critical public, that nation-making organization that has brought incredible criticality and imagination to our population. So I want to invite you to welcome you with an awareness of the histories these scenes carry and contest in their doings, and invite you to fund artists, to follow their impact, to partner with communities and universities in doing so, and ideally to consider the Puerto Rican story both on the island and its diaspora with intentional impact on redressing these histories in mind, and with a commitment to making sure that our future is bright and beautiful. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you all. We really literally only have 2 minutes left. So,
Are we seriously at 2 minutes?
To be super practical, I just want to say that I always agree with you about how artists have the solution to everything. I think they're the smartest people in the room. I always listen to what artists have to say. And when I first got to Ford and I saw the call for proposals for GIA, my first GIA, I said, well, I'll do what I've always done. I'm just going to invite 3 artists to talk on the panel. And my jefa, my amazing jefa, is my jefa out here somewhere? Margaret Morton supported me and said yes.
Yeah.
She said, yes, invite the artists to talk. It's going to be amazing. Eddie came to my panel. I'm so grateful for that. So, and I found when I got here, this spirit of generosity is something that I feel is so genuine among the artists here. I got here, I texted Sofia Maldonado, and she said, I really want you to meet these twin brother artists. Everybody write these names down. Jaime y Javier Suarez. Jaime y Javier Suarez. And she organized it for us to go to their studio. They made us some sashimi. It was amazing. And just this spirit of collaboration and generosity of the artists to one another. I would love to know, like, the nuts and bolts, how you got to the university and said, give me money to do this. And then also how you were able to make sure that artists still had a foot here, but were able to express themselves.
Right. Thank you so much for that question. So the Puerto Rican Arts Initiative, the first round, and that was the Las Nietas, Pedro and Naldo, they came in through just basic departmental budgets, right? As faculty members, we could propose a series and organize some experiments, which we call them lab experiments in the performance space. And we had a culture of holding summer institutes and one-week residencies on different topics. I had been working with E. Patrick Johnson on a series of workshops on Black feminism and performance, on environment and performance, visuality and performance, so this was just a piece of that. Pepe was already a doctoral student. Naldo was here producing work, video work. And Mulawai and Mapensi were exploding. They had a really extended site-specific performance that had done really well and were really starting to move as international artists. Then the hurricanes came, and I started knocking doors at other departments across the university. My provost, who's now the president at Rutgers University, said immediately yes and did seed funding for the project. My president initially said no. And the provost told him, you better get correct, and this is an important thing. And it was basically, within Northwestern University, we fundraised the first $500,000 of investments. And that's when Sarah reached out, and she said, it looks like you have an important project. Let me network you with some people. And that's when Mellon Foundation came in, and they helped us. They invited us to do a proposal. I had never done an external proposal for Mellon Foundation before. I had done really academic proposals for research and so on. So, thank goodness. I had some experience as a Nalaquero baby, National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, which I think was my training ground on anything arts funding and policy. And they had really good training platforms, and they were ever embracing of young generations who came into that space and learned how to hustle to get the work done. So it was the support of the foundations. Then we activated a network of 12 universities across the country. And this goes back to the idea we wanted to fund work here to help the artists remain here with salary and project support and so on. But we wanted to network them beyond the island as a way of raising the viability for sustaining their practice. And we didn't have the money to do it, but we wanted each university to pick one or two artists to move and transfer. So 12 universities across the nation collaborated and hosted residencies. So what we did is we developed artist talks and workshops in collaboration with the whole group. There were mentors in that first cohort that were more advanced artists with great circulation and experience. And the idea is all artists rehearse artist talks and workshops, and part of them at Northwestern first, and then went on tour to multiple locations across the United States. If you went to the Puerto Rico Negre exhibition, and you see the piece by Awilda Rodriguez Lora, the Avatar Video Project, that was a project that started as a Puerto Rican Arts Initiative project, and her first residency outside of Northwestern was Ohio State University. So that project with the Wexner Arts Center that then established a relationship of collaboration that kept going and became the piece that you see now was seeded in this manner. And similarly, there's about 5 or 6 other projects. Leo Villahermosa at Richmond University in collaboration with some folks there as well, who continued into multi-year relationships and activations across their creative practice with academic or artistic partners established at a university. So we were really invested both in seeding the practice in situ, but also using tactical supportive circulation, practices of network and circulation.
It's a beautiful project.